thank you for coming tonight. My name is Allison Costelow, and I am a seniors real estate specialist here in Benicia. I serve all of Contra Costa County, Solano County, and a little bit of Alameda County. And as a seniors real estate specialist, helping and supporting families through their big transitions into retirement years, downsizing, moving in with family, understanding options for senior living communities, whether it's independent or assisted, and even some great CCNRs. So that's a little bit about me. And then I have a co-host tonight that is going to be sharing a wealth of information on how to keep your mind sharp in your retirement years. And this is Eric.
Yes, thank you. It's nice to be here tonight. So, as it says in my bio there, I am a clinical neuropsychologist, executive director at the Mount Diablo Memory Center. And so what I do as a neuropsychologist is provide diagnostic assessments for individuals who are experiencing some type of neurological or neuromedical condition, whether it be traumatic brain injury, stroke, recovering from cancer or chemotherapy treatments. And then I work quite extensively with older adults doing dementia diagnostic assessments and care planning and treatment recommendations. And then I'm also, I wear a different hat. I also provide services to older residents and their families in Contra Costa, helping them find senior communities. I'm what's called a care placement or a senior placement advisor. And I help seniors and their families navigate the independent assisted living and memory care environment to best find a community that fits their needs.
Perfect. All right, so let's give an outline on what we're going to be talking about tonight. You want to go ahead?
So, you or me, Allison?
All you, Eric.
Okay, I'll go. Yeah. So, so we're just briefly tonight going to talk about 5 pillars of having a healthy brain. And so the first pillar will be healthy eating. And then the second pillar is movement equals health. The third pillar is the brains need other brains, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. And then in pillars 4 and 5, we'll talk briefly about brain dangers and treatments for certain neurological or neuromedical conditions. So this is, obviously a kind of a short presentation, and we're just scratching the surface at pretty kind of complex and robust topics, but hopefully at least some of the information that you get from this presentation will, help you get started on making some changes or maybe adapting some habits in your life to support a more healthy brain.
Wonderful.
So, as is probably no mystery to any of us, the brain is a highly complex organ, and it comprises over 100 billion neurons. And there's actually more connections in the brain than there are stars in the universe. I don't know how they know that, but it basically is that there's a lot of different connections in our brain. Our brain is a greedy user of energy. It uses 25% of our body's total energy. And by energy, I mean metabolic energy. It utilizes the blood, it utilizes the oxygen and nutrients that are supplied by our blood, and is the largest metabolic user of energy in our body, despite it only weighing 3 pounds. So it's about 1/50th the size of our body, but it uses 25%, 20 to 25%, kind of in that range of our body's energy. And our brain is primarily made up of water and fat or lipids, and some proteins and amino acids, but it's mainly fat. Is our brain is essentially, those are what the cellular structures are, mostly water, fat, and some proteins and amino acids.
So our first pillar we're going to talk about tonight is healthy eating for a healthy brain. And can you tell us a little bit more about the role that glucose plays?
Right. So, as I mentioned on the previous slide, is that our brain is a greedy user of our metabolic resources in our body. And so our metabolism basically means how our body uses energy. And that energy is getting supplied by blood, and our brain is using the oxygen and the glucose that is supplied by our blood. So our brain's only source of energy is glucose. So the food that we eat gets broken down into glucose, and the carbohydrates that we eat specifically gets broken down into glucose and is the primary source of fuel for our brain. And it keeps our brain cells alive and functioning. And glucose cannot be held in the brain. There's no reserves of glucose. So it needs to be readily available. All foods eventually break down into glucose for our brain, but carbohydrates that we eat are going to be the most readily available breakdown of glucose. And if you have too much glucose, so too much carbohydrates, too much sugars, then that can actually be toxic to the brain. Not necessarily if you eat, a couple, maybe overindulge in a couple pieces of cake every now and then, not a big deal. But over time, your brain and your body's ability to tolerate those high levels of glucose in your bloodstream can eventually cause a dysfunction. And so, for example, diabetes is a condition where the body is no longer able to break down and utilize an overabundance of glucose in your body, in your bloodstream. So one good way to help regulate your blood glucose and keep them at steady and healthy levels is to eat whole and fresh foods as an optimum source of nutrients for the brain. And the reason why is that whole foods, fresh foods, take longer to break down. And so they serve as a good source of nutrients over time, rather than, say, having a simple sugar like a piece of cake where you get this quick spike of glucose and then it crashes down and can give you kind of a waxing and waning or crashing feeling when you have that drop in your glucose.
And I know that I've heard the importance of fats for the brain. Could you tell us a little bit more about the healthy fats we should include in our diets?
Yes. Did you have another slide? There we go. Yes. So fat, so as I mentioned earlier, our brains are mostly made of fats and water. And what we found is that healthy fats, within moderation, of course, are actually friendly to the brain, are health promoting for the brain. So types of fats that you find from avocado, olive oil, coconut oil, nuts, fish oil, which is especially high in omega-3s, those types of healthy fats, unsaturated fats, are very high in antioxidants and anti-inflammatory properties. And so they are actually health promoting, and they seem to support cellular functioning within the brain. Some more unhealthy fats, like saturated fats, that you might find. Oh, thanks. Go to the next slide. Diets high in saturated and trans fats, like animal fats, seed and fry oils, and processed foods, like such things that you find from baked goods, are found to be pro-inflammatory, and these can contribute to cardiac and vascular disease. And again, occasionally enjoying a burger or some or fries is not the end of the world, but an overabundance of this type of food can put a lot of stress on your cardiac and vascular health. And anything that impacts your cardiac and vascular health is also going to impact your brain health. Because if you start to have cardiac and vascular disease, a clogging of your arteries, that can impact your brain, because remember what I talked about earlier is that our brain is utilizing the blood, the oxygen nutrients that are supplied by our blood, and anything that interferes with that delivery system can have an impact on your brain functioning.
Yeah. And I've always heard the quote, it's good to eat the rainbow, the colors of the rainbow. So a little bit about that.
Right. So eating the rainbow does not include eating Skittles or M&Ms. That's not what we're talking about in the rainbow.
Okay.
What we're talking about in the rainbow is actually fruits and vegetables that have different colors in them, because those different colors are what are called phytochemicals. And plant-based food with different color pigments are very high in antioxidants and essential micronutrients. So when you eat a variety of different colors found in different fruits and vegetables, you're really getting a nice mix of different types of micronutrients that are found in the different phytochemicals that are really health promoting. So it's not like every meal you have to have a variety of different colors within your fruits and vegetables, but just try to endeavor when you're purchasing fruits and vegetables, try to quote unquote eat the rainbow. Try to get as many different types of greens and yellows and reds and oranges and blues. And that really is found to provide your body with a nice variety of micronutrients. And kind of a general rule of thumb is that when you have a meal, especially lunch and dinner, you should try to endeavor to have half your plate should be fresh vegetables and fruit.
Mhm. And so we've talked a lot about food, but how does hydration play a role in all of this?
Well, so we talked about earlier that our brain is mostly made up of fat and water. And so if you are dehydrated, meaning not enough water in your system to be utilized by your organs, your brain cells actually function worse. It can compromise their functioning. And if you are appropriately hydrated, your brain actually will function at a more optimal level. And hydration helps the brain cells function. It also helps the process of removing waste from your brain and also can help facilitate that metabolic energy production process. And so, what they found is that even mild dehydration can cause a decline in brain functioning. So one of the big questions I get is, well, how much water should you have? And that's really individualized to each individual person. This 6 to 8 glass rule, it's kind of a myth. That's not some magical number. And also remember that hydration just doesn't come from water that you drink or a cup of tea that you might have. It also comes from the foods that you eat. So if you are eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, especially maybe even fruit that contains a lot of water, like melons, like watermelon and berries, that also contributes to your hydration. So really proper hydration is highly individualized. And then you also have to be cautious in that as dangerous as dehydration is, there's also some danger in overhydration. That if you drink too much water, then you can get actually too much water in your system, and some of the micronutrients like sodium and potassium can become too diluted. So, a good kind of way to gauge whether or not you're hydrated is you should have to use the restroom to urinate every, couple of hours is a reasonable time frame, maybe 2 to 3 hours. And then also the kind of concentration of your urine outside of sometimes certain medications can impact the color of your urine, but the color can oftentimes show the proper concentration. So if it's like a really dark yellow, assuming it's not caused by some medication, a really dark kind of yellow color, that could be an indication that you're dehydrated. So again, kind of a general rule of thumb is that your urine should look kind of like diluted lemonade is a reasonable color to suggest that you're properly hydrated.
Okay. So before we move on to the next pillar, does anybody have any questions regarding healthy eating and hydration? If not, then we will move on to pillar 2, talking about movement for the brain.
Yeah, so movement equals health. So when you exercise, lots of good things happen in your brain. So one thing is that it increases positive neurotransmitter in the brain, including serotonin, noradrenaline, and dopamine. All those are good feel-good neurotransmitters. They can activate your attention, which in turn can activate and support brain functioning. Studies have shown that exercise is just as effective as an antidepressant in mild to moderate depression. And also, when you exercise, you're increasing blood flow to your brain, which in turn increases oxygenation. And then we've also found that exercise can enhance brain plasticity, and it actually is one of the only ways that you can increase what's called synaptic growth factor, or what's called BDNF. And it's like fertilizer for the brain. It actually helps encourage synaptic growth and synaptic connections just by exercising and releasing of these growth factors. They found that individuals that um, engage in movement and exercise throughout their life, um, that it actually slows down the brain aging process. And it's been proven to slow down deterioration in neurodegenerative diseases as well.
And
And in
so,
fact, some dementia, Alzheimer's treatment centers, one of their main interventions and treatments is getting the participants to move and increase their exercise as a way to help their brains function better.
mhm. And so when talking about exercise, how much exercise and what kind of exercise are we? Ex
Right. So you should aim for a minimum of this is a minimum of 60 minutes of movement per day. Now, that doesn't mean 60 minutes of exercise. We'll get into that in a second. But 60 minutes of movement, that's like a bare minimum of when you're up and about around the house, up and about around the garden and on the outside, every little bit of movement counts. And so just try to make sure that you're kind of up and constantly moving throughout the day. And in fact, even on some smartwatches, like for example, on my Apple Watch, it tells me to stand up every 30 minutes as like a reminder how important movement is. Now, that's just movement. That's kind of the bare minimum. Exercise is different from movement or physical activity. Exercise is purposeful movement, purposeful activities that is done in an effort to increase your physical health, to have benefits to your physical health. And exercise should be sustained cardio aerobic activity, which means that cardio aerobic activity means that your heart rate is elevated. Now, you don't have to be doubled over, gasping for breath, dripping in sweat.
Hmm.
It just means that your heart rate gets a little elevated. A brisk walk, for example, is a great form of cardio aerobic activity. And you should aim for a minimum of 30 minutes 4 times per week, provided, of course, that your doctor says you're healthy enough to do that. Any safe activity that increases your heart rate is good activity. So it can be walking, it could be dancing, it can be gardening, it can be weight training or resistance training, it can be exercise bike, anything that you enjoy doing that doesn't have to be specific to one type of activity. And also you want to try to diversify and mix things up as well, that again, what you're safely able to do.
Yeah, I know water aerobics is really big for people who have problems moving around a lot. The water can really help with the joints and impact.
Yeah, water aerobics great. It's low impact.
Mhm.
It's a really great activity.
Yeah. And so, and also I've visited as a seniors real estate specialist. I visited a lot of the different senior communities in the area, and I love how important it is for them on their activity schedules. There is always movement and fitness classes and things. Even if people are in a chair, they're making it doable for everybody at every age. So it's good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chair exercise is great.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of visiting senior community centers, next pillar is our brains need other brains.
Yeah, so pillar number three, basically our brains need other brains. And what I mean by that statement is that we are actually evolutionarily built to be social creatures. So our brains' sole drive for survival is dependent on us being connected to other um, humans in other brains. And so when that is taken away from a brain through loneliness and social isolation, it is actually a health deteriorating consequences can emerge from that.
Mhm.
And loneliness can have a significant impact, not just on our mental health, but our physical health. And some studies have even shown that it can have the same health negating or health damaging effects as smoking a pack of cigarettes per day. And they found that increases loneliness, increases your risk for heart disease, stroke, depression, and suicide, and actually contributes to increased mortality by 1.5%. So again,
Mm.
that's very similar to smoking and even higher than just hypertension and obesity alone. So that social isolation is in all these negative health outcomes, it's our brains telling us that we need to be around people. We are social animals, and when you rob it of that, then there's some negative consequences associated with that.
Yeah, I've seen it myself working with the senior clientele when probably a family member passes away and they're in the home by themselves and they make the decision to move into an independent living facility and then they start socializing, following up with them afterwards, just talking to them in their voice. You can hear a world of difference from being isolated at home. A lot of times when I'm working with these people, sometimes they can't drive anymore, they don't prefer to drive much, so they're really homebound. And when they get into a senior living facility, I see so much life come back when I follow up and still talk to my clients because they become lifelong friends throughout the course. And it just shows so much in just talking to somebody, the difference that being around others and doing things that you love again and with a group of people can do for your mental health.
Yeah, one of the most gratifying things I've heard was from a daughter of a older resident that I helped place in a assisted living community. And after him being there for a couple of months, she said to me, "I finally have my dad back."
Oh,
Just because he was more social and outgoing and the
yeah,
depression improved. And it was all because of he had increased socialization.
yeah, yeah. So addressing these issues, we can.
Yeah, so just kind of around loneliness and social isolation, it is true that as we age, it becomes harder to adapt and to make changes. And as a consequence, then it makes it harder to try new things. So sometimes that's what we see with that social isolation is that even though it's not the best thing for the older resident, it just becomes um, a little bit more comfortable to be isolated rather than having to potentially confront maybe some of the anxiety of trying something new. And then what that then can cause that depression or that loneliness and isolation can cause depression. And when we're depressed, our brains seek congruency and they try to align with our emotional and mood state. And so when you're depressed, everything kind of becomes glass half empty. And so when someone even says, "Oh, let's go try, this new activity at the community center," if you're depressed, it's going to be hard to develop the motivation for that. And you're just more likely just, "No, I don't want to do that. Let's poo-poo that." And so what then happens is you be getting this kind of negative feedback loop where the depressed behavior begets more depressed behavior.
Yeah.
And so how we want to address that when there's, true kind of symptoms of depression is, well, one is treat the depression. You want to seek mental health support. So that can mean potentially um, uh, going on antidepressants, seeing a mental health counselor. And then also you want to remove roadblocks that prevent engagement and connection. So for example, maybe the notion of having to go online and sign up for an activity and get over there is just too much. That's too overwhelming. So if there's someone that can help the individual kind of sign up and maybe help arrange for transportation or take them there themselves, like to get that forward momentum going can be really helpful. Um, and then one thing that I try to work with patients on is that even though they may not feel like doing it, if they can just kind of act their way into a new way of thinking, meaning actual action, getting there doing it, even though they are telling themselves that they don't want to do it, that actually engages those feel-good neurotransmitters in the brain and will actually change the way that that person thinks about the activity and change their overall mood outlook. And so if you act your way into a new way of thinking and behaving, even though you may not feel like it at the outset, that actually is a form of treatment. And any activity that engages the brain and fosters social connection is a win. Of course, provided the activity is legal, is a win.
Yeah. Fair, fair. That's awesome. So, Eric, we have touched on healthy eating and hydration and how that supports our brain health. We've touched on movement and how that important that is for our brain health, and socialization and how that can help. So, what are some, on the other end of the spectrum, some dangers to look out for?
Right. So I imagine that a lot of us have, or it doesn't come as any surprise, but alcohol is really hard on the brain. It slows or impairs communication among brain cells. Even with moderate use, it can certainly contribute to driving risks, slurred speech, fuzzy memory, drowsiness, increases fall risk. Um, and then over the long term, there are kind of chronic changes to your balance, memory, emotions, coordinations, even your brain, your body's ability to regulate body temperature. So moderate use of alcohol, occasional glass of wine, etc., no big deal. I think the research is pretty conclusive at this point that um, any amount of alcohol is not health promoting. There used to be kind of this belief that one glass of wine per day was health promoting. Um,
Keeps the
and the
doctor away?
pardon me?
Keeps the doctor away?
Right. I mean, there was this no, kind of in the 90s and 2000s, there was some research that came out that said, a drink per day was health promoting. But really over the last 10, 15 years, the original research wasn't the greatest of research. And when they unpack that a little more, they found that it's really not health promoting. There's no health benefits to drinking. That's not to say that it's bad for you. Like I said, alcohol within moderation is fine for most people, but don't expect it to be health promoting.
Mhm.
But as you start to get into more heavier use, um, and it's general rule of thumb, it's a little different, but for men, heavy kind of moderate use is anywhere between 2+ drinks per day, um, or 3 to 4, 3+ drinks per day. So keep it around 1 to 2 drinks per day. And for women, it would be 2+ drinks per day. You would get into more a heavier use. And the reason why that's significant is that over time, if you have heavier use, that can have definitely contribute to longer term chronic changes to your brain and actually put you at a much uh, higher elevated risk for dementia.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really important reminder. So, how do heart disease, blood pressure, and diabetes impact brain health?
So, way at the beginning of this presentation, we talked about anything that affects your heart health, anything that affects your vascular health is also going to impact your brain health because your brain, again, is utilizing the oxygen and glucose that's being supplied by your blood. And so, conditions that can have a direct impact on that, like heart disease, high blood pressure, can increase you not only for risk for strokes, but blood vessel changes in your brain can put you at risk for cognitive changes and even dementia. So definitely want to control risk factors for cholesterol, high blood pressure, obesity. And the best ways that you can control that are exercise, eating heart healthy foods, not smoking, and then limiting your use of alcohol.
Mm.
Diabetes is a condition that also has an impact on your brain, primarily because of its impact on your blood vessels. Diabetes is really hard on your blood vessels and throughout your body, including your brain. And so there's a lot of associated health conditions based on the impact that it has on your blood vessels. And individuals with diabetes are increased risk for stroke and heart attack. And then we do find that diabetes is a pretty significant risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So maintaining a healthy weight through physical activity and healthy eating is really one of the best things that you can do to prevent or control diabetes. And then once you have diabetes, healthy eating, physical activity, exercise, and then of course taking the medications that your doctor has recommended is the most uh, is the best way to manage that condition.
And it's my understanding that diabetes has really been on the rise the last decade or so, that it's seen more and more of it.
I'm not sure if actual incident rates have gone up. I haven't really looked into that. But part of the challenge is our diet, kind of American Western diet, is really puts us, and lack of physical activity. It's our diet, high in saturated foods, high in simple sugars,
Hmm.
high fructose corn syrup, things like that, really raise that risk for kind of having these blood glucose spikes continually throughout the day, and then the lack of physical activity, and then your body just can't produce enough insulin to manage that, and so then it goes into a diabetic state.
Yeah. And with that, what about brain injuries and dangers?
Yeah, so we know that older adults are at higher risk of falling and other accidents that can cause brain injury. And obviously, brain injury is a big risk factor for having impacts on how your brain functions, and it can raise your risk possibly for dementia. And also, even with minor head injuries, you potentially have risk for bleeding in your brain, which is a type of stroke called a hemorrhage, and that can have a dramatic impact. So, part of what we talked a lot about is exercise actually works to improve your balance and coordination and your core strength, and range of motion. So, that is a one way to reduce the risk for falls. But even if you do fall, though, your body's ability to kind of absorb the blow can be improved with the stronger you are. Other recommendations are, a lot of organizations, for example, like Meals on Wheels, offer fall prevention classes, and then
Hmm.
make your home safer. You can actually have an individual come in and do a home safety audit and make recommendations for different things in your home, fall risks that you can remedy. Certain medications can impact your kind of cause you feel dizzy or lightheaded, and that can then put you at risk for a fall and having a head injury. And then, of course, wearing safety belts, seat belts, and wearing a helmet if you're on a bike are all good recommendations to reduce brain injury.
Those are excellent reminders as well. And what about sleep apnea? How does that play a role in all of this?
Yeah, so sleep apnea is where you have short pauses in breathing while you sleep. And it can really, in my opinion, it's one of the most underappreciated health conditions, especially for older adults. It can lead to injury, it puts a lot of pressure on your heart. So high blood pressure can even increase your risk for stroke. And then it can contribute to memory loss and cognitive changes because if you're getting less oxygen at night at a really important time for your brain's health, it can dramatically have an impact on that. There are certain lifestyle factors that can increase the severity of your sleep apnea. So, for example, alcohol, especially before bed, if you're overweight, and smoking are all conditions that can increase and potentially cause symptoms of sleep apnea. So working to change some of those lifestyle factors can potentially reduce the severity and even potentially reverse the condition. But those individuals with sleep apnea, there are special devices, such as a CPAP mask that we see there in that individual wearing, that force oxygen into your airway that can dramatically help the sleep apnea symptoms.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great overall for brain dangers and some things to think about. So with that in mind, what are some treatments? What's on the treatment side of things?
So when we're talking about treatments, we're really more specifically with dementia treatments.
Okay.
So how, and that's one of the common kind of myths I get from not only like patients and families, but even sometimes from doctors, where they're like, "Well, why do we want to do an evaluation? There's nothing you can do for dementia." And that's not necessarily true at all because there's a lot of issues that could be occurring in an individual's life, including lifestyle factors, medications that they're on, and also other medications that they can try that can really help support and potentially even improve functioning.
Hmm.
So when I have a patient, I look at things holistically, and one of the things that we talk about at length is the lifestyle changes that we talked about in this presentation, as far as diet, exercise, alcohol use, heart health, etc. And then there's also medications that individuals may be on that may increase their risk for dementia. So, for example, oops, if you can go back to the previous
Oh,
slide.
sorry.
So,
There we go.
Yeah. So, okay. So, for example, benzodiazepines like Xanax, Valium, Ativan, which are used for anxiety, those medications are good certainly for just occasional use, like if you have something really anxiety provoking, like a flight or something like that. But they're not meant for chronic use, and we find that individuals, especially older adults that are on those medications for long-term chronic use, have higher risk for dementia, higher risk for falls. And so those are definitely medications that are kind of a red flag for older adults to be on. There's other medications which are called anticholinergic medications. So, for example, anti-incontinence medications like Toviaz or Detrol or Ditropan, and even antihistamines like Benadryl and Unisom have very high anticholinergic properties. And those medications can actually deplete a neurotransmitter in your brain that's really important. It's called acetylcholine, and it's really important neurotransmitter to help your brain function as optimally as possible. And we found that research has shown that individuals that are on those types of medications long term are also at an elevated risk for a cognitive decline.
Wow. I had not didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And then
Now, if somebody does have dementia, Alzheimer's and other types of dementias, there are medications that doctors can prescribe that can help potentially slow down, and then in some cases reverse some of the changes, not indefinitely, but at least over a long period of time. So there's medications, what are called acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. And the screen there shows an example of different ones in that class. And what that does, it actually inhibits an enzyme that reduces acetylcholine. So that medication I just mentioned. So it effectively increases acetylcholine in the brain. It can may actually, and it may slow down, not slow down functioning, as a misprint there, but it may slow down the decline in functioning, may slow down the decline in memory loss specifically. So
mm,
I apologize for that typo there. Then there's another medication called Namenda or Memantine, and this activate or works on a neurotransmitter called glutamate. And glutamate can in dementia can kind of become an excess in the brain. And it's theorized that that excess glutamate in the brain contributes to some of the neuronal excitotoxicity or neuronal dysfunction, more simply put. And the memantine reduces the glutamate in the brain that so it's not as much in excess, so the cells can function a little more optimally.
wow. Well, that is fantastic information. And then there's
Yeah, and then the final medications, there's two medications that are out. These just came out over the last couple of years, and Leqembi and Kisunla or donanemab and lecanemab. And these are medications called monoclonal antibodies, and they're actually delivered via infusion. And what they do is they bind to the beta amyloid in the brain, which is a type of protein that's found in Alzheimer's dementia, and helps to clear out that beta amyloid out of your brain and lower the beta amyloid burden. And they've actually found that those medications modestly improve cognitive functioning. And they are approved for a condition called mild cognitive impairment and also early Alzheimer's disease. And so those are just out over the last couple years.
yeah, I've heard of that. Wow, that is, I mean, a lot that we went through in about 30
Hmm.
minutes talking about
Yeah, just scratch the
healthy.
surface, right?
Yeah, just scratching the surface, healthy eating, movement, socialization, and then talking about the dangers. So, if we want to get something out of this today, what is one thing that we can walk away with that we can do today to help us in the future?
Yeah, I would say pick one thing you can do that may help your brain. Think of a small first step, such as taking a 10-minute walk a few times per week, adding one serving of vegetable each day, make an appointment for a health screening or physical exam, and then write down what you will do it and when. So kind of hold yourself accountable, and then also get that support from family and friends to help you be accountable as well. So just take small steps and then build. Once you get that momentum going, just build from there.
Yes. I've always found it much easier to get to the gym when I'm meeting somebody there.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
Accountability buddy.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much for all of this information tonight, Eric. We really appreciate it. And going
My pleasure.
if you do have any questions, you can follow up with either myself or Eric. Um, and I have been holding these seminars once a month now on different topics that relate to retirement years. And so next month in July, I am going to do one on staying secure and seniors' home safety solutions, talking about fall preventions and going into the home and assessing ways to stay safe and be prepared for any emergencies. So that will be coming up July 30th, and you can register for that one. But I appreciate your time tonight, and thanks for being there with us, and hope that you got some great nuggets out of this. And again, if you have any questions or follow up for myself or Eric, our information's here, and I'll send you an email recap so you'll have it there as well. Thank you so much.
All righty. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.